Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Pokemon Talk with CALLOUS. Today I've got Cowboy Dan and Marco P joining me, and we'll be talking about one of the questions that I have received many times over the years for whatever reason. To me, this topic is ridiculous, and I thought people were joking, but I have gotten this so many times, and people, I guess, are actually serious about this, that I think it's actually worthy of a whole show to discuss. People have asked me what would need to happen for Pokemon to become, air quotes, an esport. I'm going to start out by saying that I hate that term and that anything that you're doing on the computer, it's a competition, there's skill involved, whatever, but it's not a sport. But that's a topic for another day. How does Pokemon become an esport? And people have, I guess, asked me that because of CALLOUS Invitational, because I'm putting up a Pokemon competition for money, and the logical connection is, all right, what's the next step? How do we do that same thing but make it larger, make it broader? And I have a kind of strong opinion on this subject, but I brought in two guys to talk about it with me. So we're going to start with Dan. Let's just start with the broad, generic question. Without getting into the details of how it happens, is there any merit, is there any scenario in which Pokemon could become an esport?
So personally, I think as far as the game itself, it has just as much merit to being an esport as, a lot of common games that are already esports like Hearthstone and such. I think the main thing holding back Pokemon is really the Pokemon company itself. It markets towards a different audience than the general audience that esports players want to watch, and as a result, Pokemon is just never going to see that same level.
I'll turn it over to Marco as well. Marco, do you see, without getting into the specifics, we'll do that later in the show, but in your mind, is there any viable path or viable scenario where Pokemon could become a mainstream esport?
I mean, the first thing you have to address is the money and the divide between the actual Pokemon company and the competitive side of Pokemon, and what the esport or what people would be competing for, and the format they'd be competing within, and the support of the Pokemon company. Because without the company support, you just have Smogon, essentially.
So both of you brought up an interesting point. That's one of the topping points I wanted to hit on, but because you both brought it up, we can start there. So basically, the Pokemon Company / Nintendo, they already actually do have Pokemon competitions that offer real money prizes, which are the video game championship. But that's very different than competitive Pokemon, the way that most of the people that are going to be watching this play it. I'm not an expert by any means, but basically the summary on video game championship, it's very different. It's 2v2 only. There are no singles. All the Ubers are allowed, to my knowledge. Maybe there's a ban list or whatever, but I'm pretty sure damn near everything is allowed. And among your 6 Pokemon team, you're actually only allowed to use 4 Pokemon in any given battle. So it's super different than what we're used to. So my question would be, and I have my own speculation on this, but I mean, Marco, tell us. I mean, of all the ways that they could go with it, why do you think Pokemon or the Nintendo company chooses to use that as their quote competitive format?
I mean, I feel like Smogon, or the way they see Smogon, is that it's very restricting to what the cartridge actually intends. Like VGC, as you mentioned, is very free form. Like, you're allowed to use whatever, and it's kind of just you, the player, playing the game to the fullest of its capacity, as you can. without any restrictions. Smogon is like a very niche rule set being applied to the game, which is, I guess, not at all what a big company wants. They kind of, yeah, I don't know. Another aspect of Smogon that's always been puzzling to me is like how the community would mesh with like the public eye, because a lot of video game communities are already seen as very toxic and whatnot. So, and Smogon is a very, 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 very small one, and it's already seen as like awful. But if it were to get like any bigger and gain any more traction, like, would that just be galvanized, or would it get better if it got more support from like the actual Pokemon company? Like, we don't know. It's hard to say.
I think that's an excellent talking point, and I definitely want to go further down that road in a minute. But before we do, I want to give Dan an opportunity to answer the previous question of basically, of all the things that Nintendo could do or support, why Video Game Championship? Why 2v2? Why all the Ubers? Why is that the format that they throw their money behind?
Honestly, I have absolutely no clue. Like, I mean, I haven't really played a Pokemon game since, RSE, but the standard format in those games is 6v6 singles. So that is the, when you're thinking, if you're playing RVY and you're thinking, hey, how do we turn this into a competitive game? You'd think that 6v6 singles would be the way to do it. And, the doubles format is kind of a gimmick aspect of the game. I have honestly no clue why that is the chosen method for turning it into a competitive game. I mean,
doubles was like a side feature.
Yeah, like no shade against anyone who plays VGC. I mean, I'm sure it's an equally competitive and interesting game, but as a Pokemon player, as someone who played the games when I was a kid, it just doesn't really make sense that that's the official format.
I echo a lot of what Dan said. Again, no disrespect to anyone who plays doubles. Is there skill in it? Yes. Are there players who have made more money doing that than I'm ever going to make playing Pokemon? Yeah. So, hey, I guess the joke's on me. But, I just view doubles as kind of like a gimmicky, a side feature, not the main format. I don't hate the fact that doubles is a competitive format. It just, not when singles isn't. It's very strange to me that the secondary format, if you will, is by and large the only format. There is no competitive singles out there. And my theory on it's a little more different. I think that basically they're just playing to their audience. Basically, one, they want games to be short, and video game championships are short. They all end in 10 turns, 12 turns, whatever. They don't want stall to be a thing. They don't want 100-turn games. They don't want very tactical, drawn-out, hour-long games. I love that stuff, but I don't think they do, and I don't think their audience does. And the second thing is I think they just want it to be, I mean, people might get offended by this term, but casual, more or less. Like, I think that they want it to be approachable for a younger audience, and I think an 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old kid wants to see Mewtwo and Arceus and Rayquaza and Kyogre and all that going at it. I think they want to see these Ubers flinging hydro pumps at each other, flinging thunders at each other, and just, using these really powerful attacks from the most powerful Pokemon that you can catch in the cartridge games, that you see in the movies. And I think a lot of it is just kind of appealing to that audience. I think the way that we play Pokemon, the more tactical, the more, air quotes, hardcore way, I think maybe has an even smaller audience than a very casual 2v2 format would have. Your reaction to that, Dan?
I mean, personally, I think it's as a non-VGC player, I think it's hard to say one way or another whether one is more difficult than the other. I mean, I think for the most part, when you're playing by the same rules as your opponent, no matter how simple or complex it is, you're generally going to be facing a similar set of challenges. And I don't think the format of VGC necessarily makes it an easier or more simple game. So I don't know if I agree with that personally. I just think from the perspective of the the in-game journey that you go through, a 66 singles format just makes a lot more sense, because that's how you're playing as you're going through the games, and that's how more people view the experience. So that's kind of my issue with VGC, is that it just seems outside of the experience of someone who is just starting out and going through the standard gameplay.
Marco, do you see any element of playing to your audience, specifically trying to promote Ubers, having a more casual, friendly, approachable format? Do you think that factors into their decision making at all?
Oh yeah, certainly. I mean, they have to like really modify the rule set every year, and they have like these 4-turn, or there's a reason that these games are like very short, because you have, like you mentioned earlier, these like very strong Pokemon just throwing off like powerful attacks at each other for like 5 turns, and then just like that it's over. I don't think there's the same appeal. There's that same appeal in, like, let's say there's like a Skarmory just switching like to a Blissey and then back to a Skarmory for like 20 turns, and then like you just have to react off of that. Like, I don't know how the audience is gonna, like, how hyped the audience is gonna be and how engaged the audience is gonna be in like a longer, more drawn out format, especially like you mentioned earlier, the Smogon fan base and the people who like play this format are so so few and far between that there might not be any there wouldn't be any turn up at like a hypothetical real life event. So yeah, like there'd just be no money, and then they'd shut it down.
So one of the arguments that I've heard and that I disagree with is that Pokemon was never intended to be competitive or be an esport, therefore it shouldn't be. But I don't think that matters. Like, Super Smash Brothers, for example, is considered an esport. That game was clearly, especially when it first came out, maybe they're more aware of it today, but back when Smash first came out, like N64 and then even Melee on the GameCube, it was clearly not intended to be an esport. Esports weren't even a thing back then. It wasn't supposed to be competitive. It had items and all these wonky casual mechanics. And even the designer is on record in an interview saying that that's not the way that he plays the game or the way that he designed the game, and the esports aspect doesn't appeal to him. So, I mean, I don't think intention matters. You can have a game like League of Legends or like Hearthstone or whatever that is clearly intended to be competitive, or like an Overwatch or whatever. But I don't think that the game has to have been designed to be competitive, which it is not. The cartridge games are clearly aimed at children, aimed at a younger fan base, aimed at a more casual base. That's fine. But I don't know, in your opinion, we can go back to Marco. Do you feel that intent or that design is a requirement in order for the game to succeed as an esport?
I mean, when your target audience is what, like 7-year-olds and like young children, your game can only be taken so seriously to start off, and that problem only becomes worse when you like consider, like you mentioned earlier with Smash Bros, all the gimmicks and all the items, like all the RNG involved in Pokemon, which, like, there's the saying that everyone says, like, any player can beat anyone on any given day, which is it's something I believe in as well. And in a lot of the more skill-intensive games, like League of Legends, Smash, like those games that are where the guys are getting paid lots and lots of money to like play, you're not going to see like a casual player like stand up and just beat one of them. It's going to be, they're going to blow them out every time. The pro player is just going to like, dismantle them with ease, and that's just not something that, although there's definitely a aspect of that in Pokemon, there's definitely not the same level of dominance.
I think that's a very valid point. Like a bunch of gold League of Legends players have actual zero chance of beating a professional team. Zero. It's not possible. It's not that they're going to win one game out of 100 or one game out of 500. It's actually not possible. It will never happen. And it's the same way. I mean, there's a million examples of this. The best high school team in the world, basketball, will never beat the worst NBA team ever.
Exactly.
Ever. Will never happen.
Yep.
You could run it 500 times. It will never happen. In Pokemon, that is not the case. And to me, that's a negative thing. But that could be appealing to certain people. But I think that's really bad. Like that's the fundamental issue.
Yeah.
That I can't get around. Like, even if you had a bigger audience, even if you marketed it so it's more appealing to everyone, if we're like, some of these esports things are big money. The Dota Championship gave out $1 million for first
Jesus
prize.
Christ.
$1 million for Dota. Can you imagine a fraction of that money comes down to whether or not you hit your hydro pump? Or can you imagine that, like, just flinging a fire blast at someone is the difference between you make 100,000 real dollars or you don't? That's just that's tough for me to get around.
Yeah. No, if I was playing for that much money, I'd be playing this game like just all day, every day, because that'd be my job. And that's another problem. You can only get so good at this game because there's not like frame perfect text you can get, or like perfect reactions. Like, yeah, you can respond to a situation and you can react to something and you can always make the optimal play, but like at the end of the day, like you said earlier, it's going to come down to a hydro pump hit or miss or a fire blast hit, and that could really be appealing because that's actually pretty interesting. But I think there has to be something that really kicks up the degree and skill, or the threshold for what it takes to be considered like a good player or a pro player or whatever.
Just feels awful to be on the bad end of it. Hey, I'm a pro player. I have been practicing every day for 6 months straight. I flew halfway across the world to play this event. I paid the whatever entry fee, or my sponsor paid the entry fee. I've worked so hard, and I've got this game in the bag. He has one turn to freeze me, or I win $100,000. Oh, fuck, there's a freeze. I guess I go home with nothing. Like, that's awful, I think. I mean, Dan, is there any way around? Is there any good side to the heavy variance of Pokemon? Is there a way to compensate for the fact that if Pokemon really did become an esport, we would be basically? I mean, there's RNG in anything. There's RNG in Hearthstone or whatever, but that's very, very different. I mean, just straight up click, you have a 60-40 of this happening for potentially 5 or 6 figures in real money. I mean, how do you react to that?
I mean, personally, I completely disagree. I don't think the luck is really a huge factor in turning Pokemon into a competitive game. I mean, there are a ton of, extremely valid sports or esports, or whatever you want to call it, that rely heavily on luck. I mean, Hearthstone we talked about is one of them. Personally, I think that is very similar to Pokemon in terms of the amount of luck that affects the game. Even poker, which is widely considered to be a very competitive game, has a huge luck component to it. Personally, what I consider to be the biggest drawbacks to Pokemon as a competitive game is, I mean, when you look at any other esport out there, the game that the lowest of the low are playing, like look at League of Legends, for example, and the game that the pros are playing are essentially the same game. Whereas with Pokemon, the game that the casual player, that most people are playing, is a completely different game. It's, beating all the gym leaders and all that stuff, from the competitive game, which is, 6v6 playing an actual real opponent. It's a completely different game, and that's the biggest barrier of entry to Pokemon as an esport, in my opinion.
There's definitely some good points to touch on there. I disagree with part of it. For me, who a lot of you guys may not know this, some of you do, but I was on the Magic the Gathering Pro Tour for a very, very long time. I had played competitive Magic for 15 years. I spent 6, 7, 8 years on the Pro Tour. I made a good amount of money. Just recently, I hadn't played in years, and I got dragged back to a team event called Magic Fest. They used to be called Grand Prix. Magic Fest Providence about a month ago, and me having not touched the game in years, we top baited that event and made $1,800. I mean, there is variance in card games, but I think something like poker or Magic, ultimately at the end of the day, the better players win out, and that's not to say that they don't in Pokemon, but like I would wonder whoever the best player is in any given tier. Let's just call it ABR. Let's just call it Lavos and GSC, whatever it is. Maybe GSC is a bad example because that's one of the more skill intensive formats, but basically whoever the best player is in any given tier in Pokemon, what is their actual win rate, though? Because, like, again, if you take a League of Legends challenger team, their win rate against a non-challenger team is going to be close to 100%. Whereas Pokemon, if you throw ABR against Zamiato, against TDK, against Flaming Victini, against whoever, none of these guys in the long term are going to have more than a 70% win ratio. They just won't. It just can't happen. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But the part that I do agree with that Dan said is that we're basically playing different games. There's the RPG, go around, fill your Pokedex, beat gym leaders, versus what we do. And I don't know that the majority of people necessarily would want to play Pokemon the way that we do. I don't even know if people are aware of it. I mean, Marco, is there a way to market the more competitive or the more battle-focused aspect of Pokemon, or do people just not want it? Do people just want to go around and collect all the critters and fill the Pokedex?
I think there definitely is room to market it because, like, I'm not gonna lie, like, I'm a big sports fan, and like I'm also a big competitive Pokemon fan, and like some of the stuff I see, like in battles, like is genuinely like very, very, very exciting. Like Dan mentioned earlier, Pokemon has a little bit of a poker aspect to it, and the fact that you never really know like what's going to happen because it's so hard to get like that 100% win. And also the bigger problem with marketing is actually breaking the stigma of Pokemon being like this lame casual like RPG for like simple children. I think if you get past that barrier and if you market your game as like a high-paced, like battle-filled blah blah blah, you'll have a lot more people like engaging in that game.
It's so true. I can tell you from personal experience that I have mentioned all the guys at work. I'm pretty open about my personal life. People know what I do. I've mentioned to a couple of the guys at work that, hey, I play competitive Pokemon. I'm playing in this one tournament. I'm hosting in this one tournament. I mentioned, hey, I'm managing this one competitive Pokemon tournament. I was referring to POCL at the time. I'm going to be a manager in this tournament. And one of the guys said back to me, and he was dead serious. He's like, oh, dude, can I be on your team? He's like, he plays Pokemon Go. He's played, the first couple of cartridge games. He watched the anime as a kid. He's like, oh, dude, can I be on your team? And he was dead serious. He didn't get it. And, like, I'm not going to be a jerk to him. I had to explain it, and I was calm. But, like, I think a lot of people think that way. And, like, same thing. When I've told other people, when I've told people at work, they're like, oh, yeah, dude. So, like, wait, I use, like, Squirtle, and, like, the other guy uses Pikachu, and, like, we just battle it out or whatever. And that really, truly is the way that they think about it. They just don't get it.
Yeah.
And there needs to be...
No, not at all.
Yeah, there needs to be an easier way for people to be aware of or get into competitive Pokemon. I mean, we'll go back to Dan. I mean, how do you go about doing that? Like, if you were making a conscious effort to try to get people, whether it's young people or whatever, into the competitive aspect of Pokemon, into doing it the way that we do it, what are some of the first steps to get somebody to even be aware of it, never mind be drawn into it?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that makes competitive Pokemon really difficult to get into is there's a huge barrier of entry in terms of knowledge. Like, there's so many things you have to just straight up memorize before you're even on the base level of decent play. And I think that's a huge problem with competitive Pokemon, or with Pokemon as a competitive game. And there's, like you mentioned, there's just so many people that, hey, like, they played the cartridge games when they were a kid. They know what types are effective against other things. So that's like scratching the bare minimum. So there's so many people who just have this kind of armchair knowledge about the game, but don't really understand it, I guess, in the competitive aspect. And there's just so many things you have to memorize, and that's really what makes it so hard. I don't know why I decided to do this. When I was in high school, it was probably a really stupid decision to waste so much of my brain on this stupid, worthless thing. But I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. I mean, for me, someone who's been playing competitive Pokemon for 10 years, I'm scared shitless to try to get into Gen 7. I mean, that might be me being a pussy, but, like, I don't know what half these Pokemon do. I don't know what half these moves do. I don't know which Pokemon are Mega, which ones aren't. I mean, granted, have I put effort into learning? No. Could I maybe at least do a little better than I'm doing now and learn a little bit more about it? Yes, but, like, this is from someone who's been playing competitive Pokemon for a decade. It looks intimidating and daunting to me. So, like, imagine someone who has never played competitive Pokemon at all and is just trying to get into it and has absolutely no clue where to begin. I mean, I don't. What do you even tell that guy? I mean, Marco, what systems, what videos, what resources, what would need to be in place to kickstart somebody who actually wanted to learn into competitive Pokemon?
All right. So I actually kind of went through this situation the other day, or not the other day, but like about a month ago. I had a buddy who plays a lot of Smash, and he plays like the carts, or he played the carts in the past. So maybe I thought he'd be interested in learning like competitive Pokemon. So I showed him Pokemon Showdown. I showed him like the team builder. And I showed him like the Smogon, but it was like explaining calculus to a toddler. Like none of it was just absorbing. It was just bouncing all off his head. And then he was just like too absorbed into his card game because that's just like so much more simple and just so much easier to play and requires so much less brain power. I think you actually have to want to learn, which is a big part of it. And if you really, really want to learn, there are a lot of guides out there and a lot of videos out there that'll like show you the ropes and make this thing a lot easier.
Yeah, Dan brings up a great point, just the barrier to entry and just it's so daunting and so intimidating. I don't even know where you would begin, honestly. I mean, if the community decided, if Smogon all decided as a whole, you know what, we want to expand this community, we want to get more people in this, we want competitive Pokemon to be less niche, I don't even know what step one would be. I mean, Dan, you're a smart guy, and this is a kind of BS question putting you on the spot, but I mean, where do you even begin? I mean, how do you promote it? What would your strategy be? I mean, how do you even get the message out there?
I mean, I guess if I were trying to promote competitive Pokemon, I would market the older audience of people who, played the game as a kid, and it is an interesting game, and try to market it towards the people who are playing other competitive games out there who played this game as a kid and want to do something with those those characters that they loved when they were kids. But yeah, I mean, it's really just such a commitment. It's not about like muscle memory or anything like other games are. It's just all about just rote memorization of stupid, otherwise completely useless facts, and that's what really makes it so hard.
And in your opinion, would most people just not want to do that, just can't be bothered to put in the effort to learn that much information?
Personally, if I had to go back and talk to myself when I was just learning how to play this game, I would say like, yeah, no, this is a complete waste of your time, so don't do that. So I think anyone who has any sense of self-worth would probably not want to do this.
Do you agree with that outlook, Marco? Do you think that the majority of people would find it just not worth it and would not want to put in the commitment that it would take to really, truly get into competitive Pokemon, even if they knew that it was a thing?
I mean, you can't really make a generalization on that. It really depends on the person. Yeah, I haven't really gotten a lot out of this game, like monetarily, and that might, like, some people might see that as an issue, but I've like met a lot of different people from all around the world, and like at the end of the day, I really just get a great sense of nostalgia like every time I log on to Pokemon Showdown, and it's kind of like I'm my own hero for like my 7-year-old self. And like that's kind of a cool feeling. But yeah, it's definitely a person per person thing. Like everyone has hobbies, and I think everyone should have a hobby where they do something a little more creative. And this is mine.
See, I agree with what Marco said, but like that's almost an argument against Pokemon as an esport. Do I think that Pokemon can and should be played competitively? Absolutely. But I don't think that's necessarily the same as an esport. I think it's totally fine to have a community like we have that wants to focus on the battling aspect of the game and the strategy aspect of the game and doesn't care as much about filling the Pokedex and, beating the gyms. Granted, a lot of competitive players play the cartridge games as well, but just people who want to focus on the more competitive part. And I think that's fine. I think that's great to have. I enjoy that, but whether it should be attempted to be made into an esport, I think is a different argument, and I see a lot of problems with it. You guys have already touched on the barrier to entry. We talked briefly about variance, as in we're actually putting up $50,000 on whether or not Hypnosis hits or whether or not Hydro Pump hits. I think there's issues with that. And then we need to talk about the logistics of it, too. We haven't even hit on that. So, I mean, really, truly, how would this go? I mean, Pokemon, are you really going to have a tournament for $100,000 where people can play from their home computer? The prizes right now are nothing, are pixels. Literally, no prizes for winning SPL. And ghosting, cheating, all sorts of bullshit is rampant. That would get magnified 50-fold if all of a sudden we were throwing big boy money, 50 grand, 100 grand into the mix. So like inevitably these tournaments would have to get played live. And that adds a whole different logistical problem. People would have to fly out to events because, I mean, Pokemon is a global community. You'd have to bring in people. They'd have to fly out to, hey, the next event's in New York. Hey, the next event's in Spain. The next event's in Japan. I mean, good luck on that. How practical is that for anybody, especially when this community is a lot of younger people? How many of us can really afford to hop on a plane and go fly to a competitive Pokemon event where basically, unless you win the event, you're going to be out a lot of money? And then a lot of the guys are younger. I mean, you really think a 14, 15-year-old kid is going to have his parents' approval or going to have the financial means to travel around, try to play these events competitively? It just seems like a logistical nightmare to me, Dan. And what's your reaction to that? Is there any way around that? Is there any scenario where a competitive Pokemon tournament could be played not in person? I mean, what do you do about the logistical problems?
Well, I think this kind of goes into the other big barrier for entry for Pokemon. I mean, we play on simulators where, you think of a team and you just type in what you want on it. But for the most part, the people who are playing this game, they need to actually take a Pokemon, train it all the moves, breed onto it the moves and IVs that it needs to have, and then get the EVs it needs to have via battling other Pokemon. I mean, I guess I haven't played a cartridge game since RSE, so I assume it's a little bit easier now, but at the very least, you need to train that Pokemon all the way up to level 100, which that's not easy. And that's a huge problem. So I think in order for Pokemon to be viewed as an esport, it would need to either, they would need to accept simulators into the competitive, ring, or they would need to make the cartridge games a lot simpler to, make it a lot easier to build teams on those cartridge games. That's a huge barrier to entry. If I wanted to build a team that I built in 5 minutes on Showdown onto my RSE cartridge, that would probably take me several months to do, and that's a huge problem. Now, as far as getting people to go places, I think if let's assume that Pokemon is on the same level as League of Legends, you would have the same amount of hype around it. You'd have the same companies sponsoring people who are really good. I don't think that would be a huge issue. If Pokemon was on that same level, the player base would follow suit. So I don't think that's the issue.
So for argument's sake, let's say that the tournaments have to be played live, but they are played on simulators. So basically, to prevent ghosting or whatever, you have to show up at whatever place in person, but then they're going to stick you in a booth and you're going to play on the simulator, on Pokemon Showdown or whatever, against another person, and that's the way that the pro circuit would go. Marco, do you see any logistical problems or issues with that?
I think it's just a matter of, like, hypothetically, if there was like proper backing for that, I think it'd all be fine. And I was thinking, like, you wouldn't even have to fly people all the way out. You could just have people go to like a venue in their local city where they could have like a certified referee like watch them as they play a game live in front of like an audience or something, or they could show the game like live somewhere else. But I don't know, I think the company support and the large backing is definitely the biggest issue, because we've seen people putting so much time and so much effort and so much of their lives into video games before. It's just a matter of them actually doing it.
Yeah, I mean, the money, I think, is the backbreaker, because in order to do that, in order to like host a live tournament, have sponsors, have referees, have people fly out, have a prize structure worth flying out for, all this stuff costs money. There would have to be huge money. I'm talking over $1 million easily behind all of this stuff in order to like rent the venue, in order to pay staff and have a production. I mean, there would have to be huge money behind it. So if Nintendo were not willing to do it, or the Pokemon Company or whoever, I think that's nail in the coffin. I mean, I think Nintendo's the only way, because it's illegal, right? Nobody else can do it. I mean, it's not as if like Sony could come in and say, "Hey, we'll do this." Nintendo will sue them. So like it basically would come down to Nintendo's willing to do this or not. And I think that's a hard sell. I mean, how do you indicate to them, hey, people want this. Hey, there's an opportunity here. I mean, is there any way to even begin to get through to them that maybe there's something that could be done here?
Something that was pretty cool that I think happened earlier this year was there was a tour that was hosted and pretty highly publicized on YouTube. I don't know if either of you guys heard about this, but it was referred to as a Blunder Tour, where the first place winner won $1,000, I believe. It was either 1,000 or 2,000, and it was like a 1,000 or 2,000. I don't know. There were a few thousand people, or it might have been. I'm pretty sure it was a few thousand people in the tournament. It was hosted on, I believe, Smash.gg, and that went along pretty well from what I saw. And obviously, there were thousands of people viewing it on YouTube. I think it'd take more tournaments like that, and more tournaments of that nature, and just more things of that nature, like more highly publicized simulator battles and tournaments with a lot of money behind them for Pokemon, and a lot of viewers behind them for the Pokemon Company to actually realize, oh shit, we have something here. We have lightning in a bottle here. We shouldn't waste it.
See, I think that in itself actually illustrates just how far away we are. Let's call it $2,000. I don't know what it was. He said it's either 1 or 2,000. Let's just say, for argument's sake, it was $2,000, which I'm not shitting on Blunder for at all. That's a great amount of money. I would love $2,000 right now. That's more money than my CALLOUS Invitational is going to pay out. I mean, I'm not shitting on any aspect of it, but like, really, if that tournament happens once a year and one guy wins $2,000, I mean, is that an esport? Is that something anybody can do professionally? Is that, I mean, $2,000 is great, but is it going to change anybody's life? And only one person wins it, and it's once a year. I mean, is that remotely sustainable? That to me means that we're so far away. Even my tournament, CALLOUS Invitational, it's considered, really big, and it's like so hype and all this money or blah, blah, blah. But that's just because the Pokemon competitive community is so small. You guys have to remember that in the bigger picture, whoever wins my CALLOUS Invitational is only going to end up winning $300, $400, $500, whatever it ends up being. That's great. I'll take it. Who wouldn't? But that money just isn't going to make a real impact on anybody's life. I just don't think we're even close to it. I mean, I'll let Dan chime in. He hasn't spoken in a while. I mean, do you think that more people stepping up to the plate and hosting these like smaller tours for real money, do you think that's the path to making this a bigger thing?
No. I mean, ultimately it's going to have to be from Nintendo, and that's never going to happen. I mean, Nintendo, like the money that Nintendo makes off of Pokemon, or the Pokemon Company makes off of Pokemon, is all from the merchandise, and the games themselves are really just advertisements for said merchandise. They don't give a shit about the games. They don't give a shit about the competitive community.
It's absolutely correct. Continue, but that is absolutely right, and I hope people know that. But go ahead, please continue.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, fans who come up with their own prizes, hopefully Nintendo, they'd be stupid to shut those kinds of things down, but they're not going to equate to the same things that Blizzard does with their games, because they're focused on the competitive aspect of their games, and Nintendo is focused on the plushies that they can sell. That's all it is.
Dan is so right, you guys don't even know. That's going to be, if there's one point you can take away from this show, that's the one. That's the best point that's going to be made this entire show, that Nintendo is not sitting there bringing in all their money from selling the games. They do sell very well, but it's such a small percentage of what they're actually making. The games are a segue to the plushies, to the anime, to the t-shirts, to all the stupid merchandise. That's where the money comes in. It's not from the games. And there's not to say that competitive Pokemon couldn't, have promotions or sell t-shirts or whatever. But you have to remember that from Nintendo's point of view, the money is not from the games. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges in trying to convince them that there's an opportunity here. Because like Dan said, they don't really give a shit about the games. It's about what they make after the fact. I don't know how to get around that either. I feel like I've used that phrase many times this talk. This is why I said initially in my opening statement that this whole topic is kind of ridiculous to me. I'm not trying to shit on anyone, and I'm okay for being idealistic. I love Pokemon as much as anybody. I really enjoy competitive Pokemon. I've been narrating it for years. I've been playing it for years. I would love to see competitive Pokemon be an esport or be a more mainstream thing. I don't think it can happen. I'm not trying to be negative Nancy. I just don't think it can happen. But I mean, yeah, hey, either of you step in, tell me otherwise. Marco, I mean, is there even a 1% chance of this really being a thing one day? I mean, what needs to happen?
Uh, I mean, it's really hard to say. There's a lot of money in YouTube, and if there's a chance in if there's any universe in which Mons becomes the esport, it's the universe where the YouTubers like boss up, come together, and say, like, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna.
You seem to have cut out a little bit there, Marco. I'll finish his thought while he.
Then, like,
Oh, there he is.
did you guys get any of that?
You cut out
First bit.
toward the middle, but we can. So we could just restart the thought. So YouTubers come
Yeah.
together. They form.
Yeah, I
they
was
form
saying-
tournaments. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's the only universe, or the only way I can really see this ever coming off the floor, which I don't think it will. Like you said earlier, like I'm also very, I enjoy Pokemon a lot, and I'm a big fan of the game. I've been a big fan of the game for a while, but like Dan said, and like you reiterated, the money's just not in the game, and unless something really, really big happens, like a really huge shift in marketing, or like I think the way they market the game could also cause a shift.
So are all three of us by and large in agreement that Pokemon cannot be an esport per se?
Yeah, I would say so. And I guess the takeaway I want to give is that it's not due to the game itself. I mean, there's a goddamn competitive scene around fucking rock paper scissors. Like it's not because of Pokemon as a game itself. It's because of the economics around the game.
Correct. So, like, I think all three of us agree that it's not an esport and that it's not gonna be an esport. It can't be an esport. But, I made a point to say this with still 15 minutes left in the talk for a reason, because even though I think it can't be an esport, even though these guys think it can't be an esport, there is a silver lining. Just because it can't be an esport doesn't mean that the competitive scene can't grow. And there are ways to do that. And that's what we'll spend the rest of this talk discussing. So if we're all conceding it being an esport, it being a play for $100,000 kind of tournament, that's never going to happen. How do you grow the competitive scene? Marco.
I mean, I think first things first, Smogon has to embrace that there's only so much they can do, and a lot of it depends on like the YouTubers kind of like Pokeyam and Blunder making guides or trying to market competitive Pokemon as much as they can, and maybe even to bigger YouTubers like higher up, and maybe this can grow the scene in terms of just like a more specific thing. Maybe people can like kind of just mature past their like circle jerks and kind of focus more on the like actual game, because nowadays the game is so little of what you're actually doing, because there's all the preparation, all the Discord chats, and all of this, that the game is really only just the tip of the iceberg. And I think that needs to be, that's where most of the appeal is. So that needs to be a lot of the focus.
Yeah, I agree with both sides of that coin. I think that the big YouTubers who already have an audience, I think it falls on them to step up to the plate and make a point to make more content that brings people into it, more instructional content, more from step one content, as opposed to just like narrating SPL, narrating and analyzing some high level World Cup game, whatever. Something, I think those guys, the Blunders, the Pokegame MDs, the BKCs, if they want this to grow, they need to start from ground zero. They need to make instructional content as if they're teaching a 10-year-old kid and get them into Pokemon from step one if you want it to grow. And I think in exchange, I think in turn, the normal people among us who don't have that kind of audience, just the Joe Blow community member, need to just stop being a little twat. Need to make this community worth saving. Need to give these guys that have the audience the incentive and the motivation to actually step up and do these things. And if competitive Pokemon or Smogon is just going to be a giant cesspool, then I don't really blame anyone for not promoting it if the community's full of a bunch of little twats. Like, people just need to grow up, like you said. Dan, do you agree? I mean, do you think that would help anything? If like a BKC, a Blunder, a Pokegame, these guys with a lot of subscribers, do you think those guys should make instructional content? Do you think that promoting it via YouTube is a way to make the competitive scene grow, even if it won't be an esport?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Pokemon is the largest franchise currently on Earth. There is a market out there. Of that huge franchise, there is a percentage of that base who have moved beyond the cartridge games and want something a little bit more, and would be willing to take a look at competitive Pokemon and say, "Hey, this is a way to, reactivate that nostalgia without being bored out of my goddamn skull." So I think that base exists, and if more people on YouTube and on Twitch or whatever are willing to advertise it, I think it would definitely grow.
Tell me the selling points, Dan. You are in charge of the get into competitive Pokemon marketing department. You're making the promotional video to entice a Pokemon player to really give a look at competitive Pokemon. What are the selling points? What do you emphasize? How do you try to get somebody into it? How do you draw somebody in?
I'm probably not the best person to ask about that, because the things that draw me into the game are probably the really boring aspects, like all the, the spreadsheets that you can make about it and shit like that. But I don't know. I think looking at the more mature aspects of the game is a great way to draw people out of the cartridge mindset and into the competitive mindset. Looking at, the things that make it complex, the EV spreads and, all that kind of stuff. I think that's what you kind of really have to look into to get people out of that cartridge mindset into that competitive mindset.
What about you, Marco? How would you approach trying to advertise the competitive side of Pokemon to someone who already likes Pokemon but doesn't necessarily know anything about the competitive part?
Right, yeah. So I think there's two things you have to do. The first thing, kind of bridging off what Dan said, you have to I think it'd be better to not separate the cartridge mindset from the competitive mindset, but rather combine them. Like, instead of saying, like, here are these complexities that are so different from the game you played as a kid, or that make this so different from the game you played as a kid, you say, yeah, it has all this cool stuff, but at the end of the day, you're still, like, clicking Fire Blast with Charizard, or you're still playing Pokemon. So you don't want it to be overly intimidating, but you definitely want it to be stimulating. So I think there's a way to go about that, for sure.
So what is the next step for right now? Not a year in the future, 2 years in the future. What can somebody who wants to help the competitive Pokemon scene grow, what can they do right now, today, to help?
Perhaps be less closeted. Like you mentioned earlier, you're not at all shy about what you do in your private life. I, on the other hand, am very, very low about it, but maybe in the future, starting tomorrow, I can try to be more open about it, and that's one way I can try to help and grow the community. And if everyone around, or if everyone else in the community does that, that might grow the community a lot. Who knows?
So you think making the community in general just kind of a more open, a more friendly place, you think that will in turn help the competitive scene grow?
Yeah, but I also think that would require like breaking the stigma surrounding Pokemon, which is a lot taller of a task.
What do you think, Dan? What could somebody do today if they feel religious conviction in this mission? I must make competitive Pokemon grow. It is my divine duty. How can they help?
Be less of a dick when you play against newer players on ladder.
Amen.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that was when I was first starting. That was one of the biggest things that was like making me think, hey, maybe I don't want to do this. Is you play some guy and you make a mistake, obviously, because you're new, and the guy would be like, "Wow, you're such an idiot." That doesn't really make you want to get into something, and that's just game as a whole. That's not really Pokemon specific, but if we're a game that already struggles to recruit people, try to reach out that hand instead of slapping it away.
I'm going to emphasize that same point. I'm going to tell you guys, do you know why I left? Do you know why I deleted my YouTube channel before and why I was gone for a year? It's not because I don't love the game. It's because the community sucks, because people are dicks. Like, I left because I don't want to deal with people trolling and people being negative and people being elitist and people being dicks on ladder. That's exactly why I left. Yeah. And if I end up quitting this game again or permanently or whatever, that's going to be why. I have a love of the game, but the community makes it very, very hard for new players to get in. So I think all three of us agree with that takeaway, that people don't realize because they're just caught up in their own emotions and they're young and they want to win, whatever. But your behavior actually is hurting the community in the bigger picture. The fact that you're being a jerk on ladder or you're being a jerk on the forums or you're talking down to somebody, how do you know that guy isn't just new and wants to learn and wants to play, and you're discouraging this person from getting involved and being a part of our community? Like, what you're doing is actually making it so this game doesn't grow. And yeah, I mean, that's, people can do what they're going to do. I'm not the boss, but it's hypocritical. I mean, if you want the game to grow, you're actually with your actions doing the opposite to make it grow. And I think that people on Smogon, especially younger people, don't think of it that way or just don't care because people are young and they're punks. But it's a real problem. The community needs to be a more welcoming place. Are there? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. This topic gets me thinking. What can I do? Is there? Maybe I should make an instructional video. I mean, how can I help? What kind of content would you guys like from me to maybe help somebody step up? You guys tell me. I mean, Marco, what if I'm trying to help people get into Gen 3, where do you begin?
You should probably just make a guide, because on like a team building guide would probably be a good way to start. I don't know if you've seen any of BKC's videos, but he's done a lot of videos on why X Pokemon is good in competitive Pokemon, or is good in ADVOU.
Right.
Where he takes a Pokemon, then he explains why it's good in the context of the metagame and builds a good team surrounding it. And I think you can kind of elaborate on that and just do that, but with more of a live feel, by maybe throwing some games in there and kind of analyzing your plays, analyzing your opponent's plays. Maybe getting a few friendly games would work, just so you can ensure quality, because you can't always get great games on the ladder. There are a couple ways to go about it. Those are a couple ways to go about it.
Looks like we're about to hit that hour mark, so I will give both of you an an opportunity for your final thoughts, and then we'll call this a day. Dan, your final words on Pokemon as an esport / how to grow the competitive Pokemon scene.
Just to answer your previous question, just quit deleting your channel every time you quit the game. It's one of the best resources out there, and it keeps going.
Forgot about that. Yeah.
Gotta get that in there, boys. Get that dagger in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big thing, 99% of skill in Pokemon is just experience and knowledge. There's, I guess there's probably some degree of natural talent to it, but most of the people who are really, really good at this game aren't naturally talented at it. They've been playing it for a really long time. And I think that's a really big thing that high ego players have to get into their head, is that they're not good at this game. They just spent way too many useless hours on it.
I love that.
Myself included. And I think that's an important thing you have to look at when you're playing against new players who, maybe make a dumb decision. They're just new. That's all it is.
And Marco, your closing thoughts on Pokemon as an esport and how to grow competitive Pokemon.
Yeah, just a few things. Kind of back to what Dan said about just experience. It reminds me when I was first starting off, I asked a player, I'm not going to mention, still pretty highly regarded.
BKC. Oh, go ahead.
No, it wasn't even him. It was EO, and I asked EO to tutor me, and he was like, "Nah, dude, like I'm not gonna tutor you. Just play this game, and like eventually you'll get good." And I was like, "Okay." And yeah, just don't be a dick, like to other people. Like you're not really too Hollywood for anyone, because at the end of the day, we're all just playing Pokemon online, and the best thing you can do for another person is look out for them.
I've got the MVP closing thought, guys. Ready for this? Pokemon will never be an esport, and the closest thing you're ever going to get is CALLOUS Invitational 3, so stay tuned.
He's right. That's going to be some high-quality content.
That's a nice little promotion there, right? It's starting in a week, and the prize pool is growing, so stay tuned for CALLOUS Invitational 3.
Start it right now. Start it in 3 minutes.
All right, guys, it's starting in 3 minutes. When this video's up, you already missed round 1. In the meantime, Dan, Marco, thanks for joining me. Viewers, thank you for watching. Look forward to more Pokemon talk in the future.